pricing your handmade products. Is there a right way to do it? Is there a wrong way to do it? Is there a particular formula that you should be using to guarantee success? We're all looking for the magic bullet when it comes to handmade pricing. Maybe I have it for you today. Hey there, I'm Janet LeBlanc from Paper and Spark. I help makers and artists just like you start and scale online shops so you can achieve your entrepreneurial dreams and hit your financial goals with ease. In today's video, I'll be sharing the reason why so many e-commerce sellers fail when it comes to properly pricing their handmade products, and I'm going to share what that all-important missing puzzle piece is with you. Stick around to the end where I'll also be sharing my free handmade pricing calculator. Handmade pricing is an art and a science. If you're a newer shop owner, you've probably spent a little bit of time Googling how to price your handmade goods or looking at different pricing formulas. There's like 45 different versions floating around out there, so how do you know what's best? Successful pricing, like I said, as an art and a science, the art part is all about branding, positioning, marketing to the right client, getting your message across. I'm an accountant, so heck if I know much about how to do those things right. The science part, however, is about your numbers. It's the math part of pricing and knowing how to work your numbers to spit out the right retail price from that formula. So let's talk about that. When I say know your numbers and understand the science of pricing, I don't mean find a pricing formula, plug in your stuff, and now you're done, rinse and repeat forever going forward. Truly pricing for profit means figuring out your product costs, understanding how to cover all the other costs of running your online shop, baking in the ability to pay yourself for your time, your talent, your skills, and your hard work, and then making a profit on top of all of those things. So it can be hard to find a one-size-fits-all formula for all of that stuff. You've got to really know what you're doing. But let's get to the good part. This is the pricing formula that I like to start with. First, we have the cost of your raw materials and supplies, or the cost of your actual product. You should be able to know how much your product costs you. If you are buying things wholesale or ready-made and just marking them up and selling them retail, it's pretty easy to find out the cost of one product, whatever you bought. You want to include shipping you paid, you want to include sales tax you paid, that's the cost of your product. If you're a handmade seller, it's a little more complicated. You're going to need to consider the amount of different raw materials and supplies that went into whatever you made, and you're going to want to know the cost per unit. A Paper and Spark inventory spreadsheet will always help you figure those things out if you need help with that. Next, we have your profit markup. So I usually suggest you multiply the cost of your product by a profit markup. Ideally, you want to try and start with a profit markup of ×4, but anywhere from ×2 to ×4 is okay if you need some wiggle room there. Your profit markup just allows you to be able to build some profit margin into your retail price. So we don't just want to cover the cost of our product. We need profit on top of that to run our business, to pay ourselves, to reinvest in things. The profit markup gives you some additional cushion to do that. Next, we have your labor rate. This is what you want to be able to pay yourself for your time and hard work in creating that product. And this applies to you if you are creating a product, if you're a maker, an artist, a creative entrepreneur. You want to bake some sort of labor or wage into your pricing formula so that you can pay yourself for the time you're investing in creating that product. How much do you like to include as your labor rate? I'm curious. Everyone seems to want to pay themselves a different amount. I've seen a wide range of answers here. Let me know in the comments what you're going to include as your hourly labor rate. Now here's the secret sauce of the formula that most sellers forget about: your overhead rate. Maybe you've heard this term before, maybe you haven't. If you haven't, in conceptual terms, your overhead rate, think of it as a tiny part of all the non-product, non-supply expenses your business has. Add a tiny portion of those expenses to the price of everything you make and sell in hopes of recouping or recovering that amount with every sale. That is your overhead rate. So we already took your supply or your product costs into account in your formula, and you also considered your time and your labor. But what about all the other costs of running your business? Chances are you have a lot of those: equipment, software, advertising, education, Etsy fees, credit card processing fees, marketing fees, advertising, design work, hiring contractors to help with stuff, legal fees. There's so much non-product stuff that you're probably paying for, right? How are you going to cover those expenses in your pricing strategy? You've got to account for it some way, because otherwise you're going to just eat up all the profit with that profit markup with these non-product related expenses. You think that you're going to have a profit margin built in there, but if you're not accounting for these things some way, you're just eating up the little margin that you thought you had. And that's what we're going to achieve with the overhead rate. So let's talk about an example of actually like how to calculate your overhead rate, how to plug it into a pricing formula, that sort of thing. When you're considering your overhead rate, remember, you want to be thinking about your non-product expenses. You don't want to spend too much time getting into the weeds with this. I encourage you to use an annual estimation of how much you think you're going to spend on your business. Remember, outside of product or inventory costs. So here's my example here. We've got a maker who has equipment, some design software. She uses lots of different apps. We have website fees. We have contractors, legal fees, education, the whole 9 yards. Basically, it sums up to $15,000 in estimated annual non-product business expenses. Then we want to take that annual estimation of what your business expenses are going to be, and we need to divide it by something. We need to make it a rate. That needs to be like a small dollar amount that we're going to literally just add to your pricing formula. So you have a few choices with how you can make this a rate. I've seen some people even make a percentage instead of a dollar amount, like a percentage markup. That's fine too. In this example, I'm going to divide that $15,000 estimated business expenses by the amount of products that I'm estimating I'm going to sell this year. You could also divide it by your estimation of how many products you think you're going to create this year, but really the number of products you think you're going to sell is a good way to accurately try to recover those $15,000 in expenses. So I'm hoping to sell about 2,000 products this year. If I take my $15K and divide it by 2,000, I'm going to end up with an overhead rate per product of $7.50. Again, don't overthink it. We don't have to know for sure what's going to happen. We can use estimations. We can predict what we can. The goal is that you are coming up with something that you're going to add to your pricing that represents you recovering those non-product expenses. Keep that overall concept as your goal in mind. So in this example, I would be adding $7.50 to whatever else I'm plugging into that pricing formula to get my final retail price point. This overhead rate is the overlooked piece of the puzzle with most pricing formulas that makers use. A lot of us forget it, but without it, you'll end up easily eating into that profit markup, the labor rate that you've built in, and any margin that you might have had with those non-product costs. You might think you're pricing for profit. It might feel like you're pricing for profit, but then at the end of the year, when you look at your bank account, you're like, wow, I made so many sales, but there's no money left in there. You're left scratching your head at where did it all go? And it got eaten up by your non-product business expenses. I do have a lovely little free gift for you. If you head over to paperandspark.com/pricing, you will see my free handmade pricing calculator that you can sign up to get. It will allow you to plug and play with those same components of the pricing formula, including entering an overhead. It'll multiply it for you so that you can experiment with the suggested formula and see what sort of retail prices you want to be setting your products at. Just head to paperandspark.com/pricing. If you want to dig even deeper into calculating your estimated business expenses, setting that overhead rate, and playing with pricing formulas, not just in the sense of using that formula that we suggested here today, having the plug and play pricing formula and having some additional capabilities with your break-even goals or your profit goals, being able to take your platform specific fees into account, just a more powerful pricing for profit calculator. I also have that for sale in my shop. If you want to dig deeper into how to hit any sort of specific profit goal you have for your business, make sure you check this one out. So before pricing your products, I really want to encourage you to take some time to figure out your estimated annual non-product expenses for your business. How will you cover these costs in your pricing strategy? What sort of overhead rate will you use? If you have questions about how to apply this to your business model, let me know in the comments. If you want to learn more about the steps you can't miss when starting and scaling your online shop, Make sure to watch my next video, The Ultimate Guide to Starting and Scaling a Handmade Business.